my and introduce you guys to the Common Sense Coalition. I need to make something very clear. The Common Sense Coalition is not run by one individual. I'm not the chairman. I'm just a member of it. And the gentlemen you're going to hear speak tonight are likewise. The reason we've been asked to speak is because of our backgrounds and the research that we've individually done, and also our experience with this upcoming bond election. And the agenda for tonight is going to go as followed. First, we're going to hear from, I believe, Frank Anderson first, and he's going to go over why this bond keeps coming to us and why it's not going to go away unless the citizens come together and make a very clear statement. Next, we are going to hear from Blaine Thatcher, who is going to go over the city financial numbers. Blaine, profession is in finance, and so we've elected him to go over that because that's his expertise. And last, we're going to listen to Steve is going to talk to us about his experience on the Blue Ribbon Committee and how we can resolve these problems, ideas they had to resolve the needs of our city going forward. And then lastly, I'll go ahead and sum this up. We don't expect this to go past the top of the hour. After we're finished, anyone who has questions can come forward and talk to any of us that presented individually. We'll remain up front, and you can go ahead and ask us any question you like. I'd like to start off the meeting by, first of all, thanking you all for coming and being concerned about what's going on in our city. The coalition itself has put in a lot of hours in trying to pull out the data you're going to see tonight. We're not fabricating this. We're not making any of this stuff up. And within 24 hours, because it didn't make a lot of sense for us to print out a bunch of stuff, within 24 hours, we'll put all our facts and findings up on the webpage, pgcanddomorforless.com, and you'll see it in the updates section. And that's our goal. Please give us 24 hours to put that up and get all these findings out there if you want to take a further examination into it. So with that all being said, I'm going to turn the time over to Frank. When Frank's done, we'll just have him turn over the time over to Blaine, and likewise on to Steve. So again, thank you all for coming, and Frank, the mic's yours.
And I think that's a lot better sound-wise. I also would like to thank you all for coming out here tonight. And my part of the presentation, because we thought first thing we need to do is tell you where we came from, how we got here, why we're here, and where we're going. And so the first thing is the city's been divided for several years now on the bond. And one of the first things we want to express and make sure people are clear on is that we believe the current public safety buildings are inadequate and that the current living conditions in the fire station are not acceptable, and that the PG Fire and Police Departments have done an amazing job with what they've had. We're very appreciative of them. And this list of needs that's on the Pleasant Grove website, the needs in the fire station, the police station, and court station, we agree 100% with. We believe those needs need to be met. And then the question becomes, so why is there the divide? If the bond supporters and the bond opponents all agree that those needs need to be met, we thought we'd start with showing you where we came from to show you how we got here. So with that little history lesson to begin with, it started back in 2011 when the city council hired a company called VCBO Architecture, and they wanted to revitalize downtown. And in order to revitalize downtown, and that's a term you're going to see pop up quite a bit, they came up by late 2011 with the Pleasant Grove Downtown Civic Center Master Plan. It's a 4-block area of the city. And just to give you some perspective on how that master plan is set up, right down here, that yellow box is the old rec center. So if you're looking at these 4 blocks, that yellow box is the old rec center. If you go up, the library is about where it's at, where it should be right now. And when they created this master plan, they wanted it to have a campus feel in the town. They worked out the locations. They mapped them out in a work session with VCBO. And they put the fire station up there in that corner. Now that corner is a block with a lot of residences, and they would need to purchase that land to finish that plan. And so in April of 2012, they were ready to display their plan to the community and look to see what the community input was. They had 4 scheduled meetings. At the first of the 4 scheduled meetings, the opposition was so strong that they canceled the remaining 3 meetings. And that opposition centered on the $50 million cost. Basically, they were presenting it as $50 million. Also, there was the planned demolition of 17 historic buildings that the Utah Taxpayers Association came out against that plan. And so after they canceled those meetings, we moved forward to mid-2013, and the council went to a budget retreat and came out and said that they had decided that forget the master plan, where the public safety buildings are going to be our priority. They would still want the buildings to have a campus feel. They still would have the locations that were mapped out in the work session. They still wanted it to revitalize downtown. And so the plan that they presented was the exact same location for the public safety buildings out of that 4-block area. Then in August 2013, they announced that they were going to move forward with a tax increase. Not a bond, not a vote, but just a tax increase of $19 million, which was reported as a 52% tax hike with no public vote. Well, as you will remember, when we had 500-600 people come to the fire station, the public was very opposed to that plan. And so we said we didn't want that, and so they came up with a $17 million general obligation bond that needed a public vote. And after that session, on August 28th, the city, Mayor Call, announced that they had commissioned a Blue Ribbon Committee to advise the city on their plans and to give input. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Blue Ribbon Committee because we'll have that come up later on. I just wanted to give you the general history. And at this point, I know you're all nodding your heads going, yep, we remember all that. And that's where we were at. But I'd like to take you back a step to the budget meeting that they had in actually February 2013, before they announced the public safety buildings were a priority. Because at this point, when that $19 million came forth out of the $50 million Civic Center plan, it was a surprise to most of us. So I wanted to go back to that budget committee meeting to show you how we got here. Before we do that, I'm going to go back with the Blue Ribbon Committee. When the Blue Ribbon Committee came up with their 6 options, they ranged from $2 million to $10 million. The $10 million option was basically the same plan that the city was doing for $16.9 million, but they were saying we could do it for 10, we're pretty sure. But the city council wasn't interested, and they basically told the Blue Ribbon Committee that remodeling the current facilities isn't congruent with the current Civic Center plan. And that caught our attention, because I thought we were building fire stations, police stations, meeting public needs. Why does it have to be congruent with the Civic Center plan? This specific plan. So we finally got the budget retreat minutes from 2013. This is page 36 to 48. I'm going to show you the excerpts that we felt were significant. And when we post this on the website, we will give you the exact page locations. We'll have the links to all of these documents that we're showing you. This discussion on the Civic Center plan in that February 2013 meeting started with Councilmember Jensen asking about the bond options in the timeline. And he said it's not reasonable for the city to put in a $12 million pool, then wait 20 years to put in a police station, then wait 20 years to upgrade the fire station, then wait 20 years to build a new library. So the actual cost of this Civic Center plan wouldn't be a $20 million bond, but an $80 million bond to do all of the capital projects. And he said the question is when to go to the citizens about what to do. On the bottom part, Mayor Call then said the buildings would not have to be completely spaced out, but they could overlap. For example, every 5 years, the city could ask the citizens for a bond vote. Councilmember Jensen said he would like to find out what the citizens are willing to pay for. Councilmember Lamone voiced her concern that if the projects are all on the ballot, The citizens may continue for years to not vote for infrastructure projects. At what point would the city decide to make a change regardless of what the public votes for? Because they're essential services. Mayor Call said perhaps the council should discuss what projects are less likely to be approved in a general obligation bond and handle them in a different way. Then put the ones that are likely to pass up for a general obligation bond through a general election. So that's how we got to the $19 million tax increase they were going to do. Mayor Call commented there's also a political consideration with regards to how many voters would show up. He said if you want to pass a bond and there's a sizable minority that would vote for it, then you want to do it in an off-election year. But if you think you have widespread support for a particular project, do it in an election year when people show up to the polls. To which Administrator Darrington replied, if everyone is aware of the upcoming decision, it will become a battleground for the election. If the city does the public safety building as a decision of the council, it's less political and a different discussion, but there may be ramifications as well. So that's why all of a sudden public safety buildings were the priority. That's why it was still being built in the exact same place. Because the idea was, let's build a fire station, then we'll come back, as Mayor Call said, 5 years later, we'll build the next one. 5 years later, we'll build the next one. 5 years later, we'll build the next one. Councilmember Jensen said that if the general obligation bond vote occurred soon after the approval of the public safety bond, it'd be less likely to get approval. From a strategic standpoint, if the object is to get as much as possible, the city should do the general obligation bond first for the library, pool, and art centers. Then Director Lundell said the city could speak to one of the companies that consult on general obligation bonds and the process for approving them. Mayor Call confirmed that the overall intent is to do a sales tax revenue bond for a public safety building this year with a public hearing by August, and then wait to June 2014 to do a general obligation bond for the pool and library to give the general obligation bond the greatest possible chance of passing. So the thing that's fascinating there is when they talk about doing $80 million, nobody talks about, is that even feasible? Can we afford it? They're just discussing how can we convince people to go along with this plan. That, when we had 4 public meetings, we canceled 3 of them because the public didn't want it. So here's how we got to August 28th when we had the Blue Ribbon Committee created. And now we know the rest of the story is the bond failed by about 70 to 30. We had a write-in mayor elected. And pretty much, I thought, had a mandate that we wanted to meet those public safety needs. Remember, we showed you at the beginning, we recognized the needs, but we didn't want the civic center plan. We didn't want the downtown center, and we didn't want to be bonded, you know, 50, 60, 70, $80 million. So they went back into the budget retreat in February of this year. And this is the minutes. What I'm about to show you are the minutes from the budget and planning retreat from Friday, February 7th, 2014. So this is after the bond election lost last time. This is what the city then planned. Mayor Daniels stressed the importance of city council meetings being a place where individuals feel safe to express themselves. Administrator Darrington provided some context relating to the original Civic Center plan. He noted that upon reviewing the notes from the budget retreat held 4 years ago, he learned that the city's #1 priority, as discussed in that meeting, was the Civic Center. Turn the time over to Director Young. Mayor Daniels asked the council what their overall impressions were with pursuing a long-term Civic Center plan. Councilmember Anderson stated she knocked on 1,500 doors. There were 2 main questions. First, citizens wanted a more defined public safety option upon which to vote. I would agree with that. And second, they wanted to know what the city would do about roads. Other than those 2 concerns, citizens were generally not opposed to the Civic Center plan. Director Young stressed that the staff had identified a 4-block area for this plan because this is the amount of land needed in order to accomplish those goals. He emphasized the city can't do everything on what they currently own and that the purchase of additional property is necessary. Chief Sanderson remarked the only reason the Civic Center was never considered to be built out of the downtown area was because the city didn't own enough property. Chief Smith added, another reason given to his department for possibly building outside was that it would be less expensive. He wanted to know if the city shied away from building in the downtown area, who would build there instead. Chief Smith felt the city should show some pride and lead the way for building in the downtown area. A second informal vote was taken for whether or not individuals were in favor of a 4-block plan with the option of rearranging the buildings from where they had been indicated in the current Civic Center plan. Staff and elected officials voted unanimously in favor of this option. So right after they just lost in that bond, they unanimously are going to move forward with that same civic center plan, but they'll move the buildings around. So now the fire station, instead of being up in the corner where it was, is down now where the old rec center would be. Mayor Daniels summarized the discussion and wanted to clarify the conclusions that have resulted from the discussion. He explained the council is in favor of moving forward with a public safety facility on property the city currently owns without addressing property that they don't own, and the 4-acre civic center plan. Councilmember Lamone added that while a conceptual plan needs to be available for future planning, she reiterated that she does not want to campaign for the entire civic center all at once. Plan's not going away. We're just not going to do it all at once, piecemeal. Director Young agreed with Councilmember Lamone. He stated that part of the conceptual plan needs to include how all the components of the civic center will work together so that in the end, it makes sense. So what's changed since 2013? We would argue, and it was our opinion as we went through these things, that nothing has changed. They still want to build a master civic center plan. They want to do it downtown. And they went through this process with MoCA that was supposed to start from scratch. If you remember, MoCA was standing on the stage here saying, we don't have a dog in this race. And we're starting from scratch. No locations have been predetermined. But 10 days before he stood on stage telling us no locations had been predetermined, on April 15th in the Pleasant Grove City Council meeting, because it was 9 days. On April 24th is when we had the meeting here where MoCA stood up and we introduced the citizens committees that had just been organized, and we introduced the steering committees and so forth. Administrator Darrington stated he and the steering committee met with the consultants working on the public safety buildings. The consultants are MoCA. And keep in mind, this is 9 days before the citizens committees ever started. And to discuss the guiding values for the committee and the building. The two guiding values were described as making public safety a priority, which we can all get behind, and having a facility that will help revitalize downtown. Location was predetermined once again. So then what happened is there was a steering committee that had the two chiefs, two city council members, and city administrators and the mayor, all city officials who all had voted back in the budget retreat that unanimously the civic center plan is what they wanted. The steering committee hired MoCA. MoCA reports to the steering committee. They came up with the guiding principles that we were going to have a facility that would revitalize downtown. And then they announced the Blue Ribbon Committee was still going to advise the committee. Except they also noted that they had added some members to the Blue Ribbon Committee. They added the fire chief, the police chief, the mayor, and Councilman Jay Meekum. All the ones that were on the steering committee that gave MoCA the directive to come back with a facility downtown. And in fact, the Blue Ribbon Committee now, with the three original Blue Ribbon Committees who had the less expensive alternatives outside of the downtown area, were outnumbered right off the bat, 4-3. And now today the city will tell you that the majority of the Blue Ribbon Committee is in favor of this new plan. You just have to know that they're in favor of the new plan because it was the steering committee themselves that they added to Blue Ribbon Committee. And in essence, the steering committee now was advising themselves. Then they did one more thing that Curtis Miner, who was a member of the Blue Ribbon Committee, pointed out in our last public meeting here with the city. He said the Blue Ribbon Committee was given a very narrow directive to just focus on new buildings. You can't look at any other options, which automatically eliminated all the Blue Ribbon Committee options that they had presented to the city. So at that point, that's where we are. That's how we got here. Those are the things that concern us. We need to meet all the needs. I would conclude that we cannot afford $70 to $80 million civic center. And to do that, now we want to move, and we'll bring up Blaine Thatcher, who will take the next part of the presentation. Now we know how we got here. Why are we here? Why does that plan that we just showed, why does that concern us? Blaine?
Well, Frank forgot one thing, and that was to introduce himself, so I'm going to do as they told me and introduce myself. I'm Blaine Thatcher. I have lived here in Pleasant Grove for 22 years. And I've raised my 3 children here. My youngest just began studying at BYU, and we have very, very much enjoyed living in Pleasant Grove. I can honestly say that living at the foot of Mount Timpanogos is one of the most idyllic settings I can think of to have a beautiful community like Pleasant Grove. As I started looking at this bond issue last year, and then particularly again this year, I became increasingly concerned with the process that the city was going through, and Frank just told you quite a bit about that. The more I looked into that process, the more concerned I became. And so the questions that really started to stick out in my mind not only were the process, but also became some of the finances. So what I would like to do is try to give you a financial overview, if you will, of our historical spending, our financial situation in recent years here in Pleasant Grove, and sort of the picture that we're dealing with as the city presents these options to us. So historically, I think most of you know, Pleasant Grove has been a modest city. We have tried to live within our means. We have modest facilities. We are a small city. We have grown, but yet we are still a fairly small city. So let's begin to look at our spending trends. Back in 2004, and I should preface that the source of these numbers are directly from the audited financial statements. These operating expenditures and revenues that we're going to look at here are directly from the 2013 audited financial statements of the City of Pleasant Grove. Historically, we have, and these are operating expenditures for all of the general services of the City of Pleasant Grove. So this includes all governmental services, public safety, water, storm drain, parks and recreation, sanitation, all of these basic services, okay? Our expenditures are the red line, and the program revenues are the green line. And you can see back in 2004, 5, and 6, our expenditures were less than the program revenues. Now the program revenues are it's not all of the revenues of the city, but it is the program revenues they refer to as the fees. I call them taxes, the fees for the services that the city provides. So again, public safety, parks and recreation, water, storm drain, etc. That's the trend historically that we've been following. In 2007, that began to change. Our expenditures climbed dramatically. Now, there is quite a spike there in 2007. That is related to several grants that the city received, and so it's a little bit abnormal, but you can see the general trend. Our expenditures are increasing dramatically. In fact, since 2007, our expenditures have doubled. That is the expenditures to provide basic governmental services in Pleasant Grove. Our revenues have not quite kept up. So since 2007, our expenditures have exceeded our program revenues by an increasing amount. In 2013, that deficit between the operating expenditures in Pleasant Grove was almost $8 million. So how do they fund this spending deficit? The tax revenues from property taxes and sales taxes are having to cover that deficit. And with an $8 million deficit in 2013, those tax revenues for property taxes and sales taxes were about $10 million. So it doesn't leave anything, essentially, or very little, to apply to any of the other needs we have in the city. So now I'd like to look at the debt picture that we have in Pleasant Grove. In 2005, 2006, following the spending trend back then when our expenditures did not exceed our basic program revenues, we had a total of about $14 million in total debt for the city of Pleasant Grove. And again, the debt is the red line, revenue growth is the green line. In 2007, our debt picture began to change. In 2007, well, from 2007 forward to 2013, we have added $56 million to the debt total of the city of Pleasant Grove. That's 5 times the amount of debt in just 7 years. During that same time period, our population growth was about 12%. But yet we have 5 times the debt. Now, because we're not controlling our spending, everything we need to do in the city, the only option we have is to bond for it. In 2013, we now are paying $1.5 million a year in interest. That's over 5% of the entire expenditures, the operating expenditures of the city in a year. So our debt picture has changed dramatically. Now, how does that level of debt compare to other cities? If you look at other cities in Utah County, we have more debt than any other city in Utah County of our size. We're only behind Lehigh and Provo in the total amount of debt of the cities in Pleasant Grove. A city in Utah County, excuse me. We have more debt than Orem, which is a significantly larger city. When you compare the debt to our revenue, we're number 1 in Utah County, meaning we have more debt to revenue than any of the other cities in Utah County. This does not look like a sustainable picture to me. Now, you may be thinking maybe there is a revenue projection or some reason the city has begun to spend in this fashion. So let's look at the city's projections of revenues. Last year, in July of 2013, the city did a study, and they call it the Comprehensive Financial Stability Plan. So let's look at the revenue growth that they're projecting. This plan, the study they did was, they assumed if we are able to build out all of the business that is likely to come to the Grove area in Pleasant Grove, what will that do to our revenues in the city? So that was what the plan was designed to do. So they studied this, and it found that it would take till the year 2050 to build out the city. And if we got all of the business that we are likely to have come, both retail and otherwise, into Pleasant Grove, it would add $4.4 million of additional tax revenues to our annual budget. That's not a whole lot, and you can see on that small bar chart there that it does increase our revenues, but it takes quite a while, and it's not a very significant add as you compare that to the debt that we already have achieved. So with the rate of increase in our operating expenditures, this rate of revenue growth doesn't sustain or doesn't even keep pace with the debt growth. So now, in light of that historical picture, we need to look at the projection of the debt that the city is proposing. Currently, with the debt load that we have now, Pleasant Grove is in the 4th position of the cities, the significant cities in Utah County, as far as the amount of debt we have per capita, per person in Pleasant Grove. If we pass this bond, the city is planning to add $12.7 million of debt in 2015, and that would move us to the #1 position in the amount of debt per capita. If we look at debt to revenue, we are already in the #1 position in Utah County. So now if this type of debt increase on top of what we already have is not scary enough, the city's talking about doing this every 5 years to finish the Civic Center plan. So if we begin to chart the debt growth, we take off from where we are now at about $70 million in debt, and we jump to $82 million of debt next year. And if you do this every 5 years, your chart climbs very significantly in the amount of debt we have. It only levels off because as you get out 20 years, some of these bonds begin to be paid off. Now, if we compare that to the revenue growth that we just looked at on the Comprehensive Financial Stability Plan, the revenue in comparison to that debt looks like a flat line. How are we going to be able to pay for this type of debt load? Now, that debt projection is only considering new debt added to the picture for buildings in this downtown civic center plan. That doesn't consider any of the other needs that we have in the city. So what happens if we look at roads, for example? Per Mike Daniels, our current mayor, we need to spend $200 million over the next 20 years just to keep up with our basic road maintenance. That's a lot of money. On top of that, Public Works tells us that it doesn't help to redo the roads if you don't redo the water infrastructure underneath the roads. We're told we have another $100 million in water infrastructure over the next 20 years. Our water pipes are somewhere in the 50 to 80 years old range under the roads. They're breaking all the time. The 2013 audited financial statements states that we had 127 water main breaks last year. That's almost one every 3 days. Our roads and water need a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of money to do it. Those numbers break down to $10 million a year to do roads, $5 million a year to do water. That's an additional $15 million a year. And if our operating expenses continue to increase like they are, the only option will be to bond to do that. And if we add that kind of debt load, another $15 million a year to the debt picture we already just looked at for a downtown civic center plan, the debt really begins to go off the charts, and we're not seeing anything that would indicate our revenues could keep pace. Now, we could say, what if our revenue projections are wildly off? Well, double them. You could double that revenue projection, and you still don't come close to meeting the debt obligation. You would have to probably triple revenues to come close to handling the civic center debt. And if you add the roads and water on top of that, you're talking about tripling revenues again. If you triple your revenues, how do you do that? You have to increase taxes. If we have to triple our property taxes, or possibly our sales taxes, how attractive is that to business? How likely are they to come and help expand our tax base? It appears to me that the only option this leaves is to dramatically and significantly increase individual property taxes in our city to meet these type of obligations. I was hoping this would be a little more positive presentation. That feels a pretty negative assessment, but in looking through the city financial statements, this is where we are historically now for the last 7 years. It's a pretty poor trend, and they're projecting some really significant increases on top of where we are. So I'll turn the time over to Steve.
Okay, so I'm Steve Schrader. I've lived in Pleasant Grove for about 17 years. I have 4 daughters that have gone to school here at this junior high, all throughout this town. I was on vacation for my birthday in 2013, August, and I was called by Bruce Call to form a Blue Ribbon Committee. It was after an emergency session. They said we need to get a few guys together. That committee consisted of myself. It consisted of Bill West. Consisted of a man by the name of David Holdaway, former mayor, Dan Fugel, and Brent Halliday. And each one of us, except for Brent Halliday, had a long career in construction and interest in construction. We'd all served publicly in the city. Brent Halliday was actually a state fire marshal and a sworn police officer. And the charter that came from the mayor at that time had one purpose and responsibility. And that purpose and responsibility of this committee was to provide insight, analysis, and feedback to the mayor and city council regarding the city's plans to upgrade physical facilities for police, fire, courts, and dispatch services. It was really important that this committee had about 30 days to go out and try to find, the main concern was to make sure that the council pressed forward with the 2013 bond, that the citizens should get the most for their money. We wanted to make sure that as they pressed forward with this, that no matter what the amount ended up being, they had to wait a few days to turn in the actual and apply for the bond amount, but that we would make sure that they get the most money for bang for the buck. And the Blue Ribbon Committee tried to make sure we were not advocating or discouraging. We worked really hard, and we had gone to several meetings saying, look, we want to look at this charter as we're not going to tell you how we're voting or where we are with this thing. We're just going to look at this with as many options and what we can to help make sure that we're getting the most for our money. We also wanted to make sure that the City Council truly understood all the options that were available. The Blue Ribbon Committee was under the impression that City Council was truly interested in looking at our options. Options included several things. We had remodeling, upgrading, moving planning and zoning employees into buildings on Main Street that are actually vacant right now and could be leased. We looked at renting the Bake Building, like I was saying, phasing the construction over a more conservative period of time, relocating the fire station to more appropriate out of the downtown or center of town location, and then adding or expanding onto the current police and city buildings. So our options were just options. And I know there's been a lot of talk about the options that are out there and what was vetted and what wasn't. And we came, again, with options to the city. That was our job, to present options and analysis and what types of ways they could upgrade the facilities downtown. And so, again, the lowest option we had, which is an option, was $2 million. $1 million to renovate the fire station We thought that the community development whole section could be given for bedrooms, for the dormitory situation, for the conference rooms, for offices, for a brand new kitchen. I mean, all of that could be reconfigured. We also had $1 million for renovating and adding on and expanding to the, and taking care of the needs. Frank had showed a slide earlier of those needs, to take care of those needs right away in the police station. Then after about a couple weeks of that, it was really interesting. We got a letter thanking us, operating. It says basically what we had self-directed ourselves, or what we were doing, was what we can do to make this project a reality. In other words, the group asked themselves, what can we do to balance the need for upgrades with public aversion to tax increases? And guilty as charged. That's what we were trying to do. It was an admirable approach, and certainly within the chartered responsibilities, but in some ways the approach has led to scope creep. So basically, we were refocused, our assumptions and boundaries, and right here, our focus on the new facilities for fire, police, courts, dispatch was to avoid options for recycling current facilities to meet these needs. We were to assume that there was going to be a population of 55,000, and we were to assume that this would be a 50-year facilities, which I believe ties back to what Frank was trying to outline with the 2013, and then subsequently after this exercise by the Blue Ribbon Committee in 2014 was to go with the Civic Center plan. Other mixes that we had for remodeling, once it was only told that we could only look at new buildings, we said, let's look at prices. Let's look what's being done historically around the state with fire stations. Let's look at what's being done around the state with police stations. Separate buildings, not necessarily one fire, police, courts complex downtown, but in other locations in smaller buildings that could be broken up. I mean, a police station is much different from a fire station, and I think everybody in here would recognize that. And if you were to combine them, you can see where costs can go up. Renovated courts, 1.3, so another option, again, we provided within a 20-day period, after we were told, don't look at remodeling, was $7.4 million. Now, again, everyone on the Blue Ribbon Committee had construction experience and had been in, and we all looked at this and said, this can be done for a lot less. The $19 million was ridiculous. We also said that 16.7 was also too expensive. And then again, if we looked at another mix of new buildings, we had a brand new fire station. We came up with an idea of a new library, renovate the old library, where then we could take city admin and maybe even the administration from planning and zoning, move all of those into a remodeled old library, renovate the old police courts, and all of this could be done for less than $9 million. Again, these are options. We were not just stuck with the one brand new thing. We said, look, there's several options here. And there were some iterations of these options, but basically this is the summary of those options. And the bonus here was the new library, which was part of their Civic Center plan, what they wanted to include. You know, this was our intention, and we went through the election, and again, it was voted down. We all know how that went. Frank did a great job explaining that. And shortly after that, one of the prominent members of the Blue Ribbon Committee had resigned. Actually, the whole Blue Ribbon Committee was pretty much defunct after the mayor was no longer chartered. It was no longer a Blue Ribbon Committee because it was the mayor that chartered it. But it was really interesting. I think he really summed up in his resignation exactly how everyone, and I've talked to every one of them, and we all felt the same way at the end of this process. He said, in his words, I do believe the intent of this committee changed as we tried our best to make suggestions that would allow our elected officials, the city administration, and the citizens of our community choices to complete this badly needed upgrade to our public facilities. So, again, Frank had explained that we've come to quite a divide, and it's not a happy divide, but I do think we're all built around one common core, and that is how can we take care of the needs downtown. Again, we do not disagree with these needs. They are plainly and well evaluated. I've been through the buildings, we toured the buildings, we've walked into the bedrooms, we've seen everything that they have listed on this list. What we disagree with is that we have a need to revitalize downtown. And you can talk to Blaine afterwards, again, about the budget and what it's going to take to do that. It doesn't have to take that much to meet the needs, but it's way too much to revitalize downtown. It's not a need that we have. This is Pleasant Grove, Utah. So we would extend that branch out. This is the conclusion of the meeting. I'll turn the time over to Andy. That's kind of how we got to where we're at with the Common Sense Coalition. Again, it's way more than one person. There's 80 people last we knew of that were supporting and doing things, and we appreciate all your attention and focus. Again, we'll have questions up here afterwards, but we'll turn some time over to Andy. Thank you very much.
I want to reiterate what Steve said. Thank you so much for coming. We want to just let you all know, again, we realize their needs are there. But we also realize it's not the city's job to revitalize our downtown. That is not a need. That is a want. And that's why we've come out so strongly against this bond. We need to fix this stuff. It's getting old. We're all getting annoyed with this. And I feel bad for our public safety people, because here we go, another year with this want to revitalize downtown. The citizens already spoke about this. We spoke about it in the survey. We spoke about it last year during the bond. It's my belief it'll speak out again, that is not the need. Our downtown is revitalizing through private enterprise. I love our downtown. I think it's turning into a gaslight district. I love to walk down there, grab a cupcake, get a pizza, visit with people I know and love, walk into the print shop and get the local to gossip. I love that stuff. You'll see me down there almost every day. That's what our downtown is. And that's what it's becoming and evolving, because that's what we grew up with here in Pleasant Grove. I've been here 40 plus years. I'm so grateful my parents bought a home in town. I married a gal whose family would pioneer stock, walked into here when it was just sagebrush and trees. Our town is our town. We as the citizens need to come together. When this bond is over, it's my hope that we'll be gracious. Win or lose, the citizens need to be gracious. And I know we can come together and focus on those needs. In closing, thank you for coming. Please feel free to grab a sign on your way out. They're in the corner right there, pulling right out of the ground. If you'd like to donate to the Common Sense Coalition, so be it. We'd love to have your help. If you'd like to sign up and be part of the movement, so be it. We'd love to have your help. And I just want to personally thank all you guys for coming. I'd like to thank those speakers tonight for all their hard work. And let's go out and get this done and be gracious and move forward. Thank you.